Okay, I want you to be really quiet. I want to get a baseline for the quietest we can get it in this room. That's too low. Something's wrong with my meter. Okay, so as soon as this is up and running, okay, real quiet now. Well, the meter cuts off. It doesn't read below 40 decibels. It's kind of jumping around in the mid-40s, so I'm just going to call it 45 decibels. Oh, you know what? Here's the problem. I wanted this to be on all the way. But yeah, that, no wonder. Okay, let's try it again. Real quiet. About 69 decibels, okay? So you should note that. And this is what I've got. I have a decibel meter, so we're going to get a baseline before and after I do the demonstration. And so before, we got 69 decibels. I've also got a tone generator, and I'm feeding that into this speaker. And the tone generator is set at 120 hertz. That's an important frequency.
What's 69 decibels then?
That's when you were all being very quiet. That was the decibel level of the room with just the speaker.
Why is it going down though? It's like 66.
It's kind of jumping around because the sound level in the room is kind of jumping around too. It should.
I was going to say because it's so low.
Well, when I was leaning over, I was maybe focusing some sound that way. Okay, and then, so I've got the decibel meter to record the sound level, and I've got the tone generator going through the speaker, 120 hertz. And then the last piece is this hollow cardboard tube. Okay, nothing up my sleeve, it is just a cardboard tube. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put the cardboard tube in front of the speaker now. We went from 69 decibels to 91 decibels. So 69 to 79 would have been a times 10. 79 to 89 would be another times 10. So now we're up to times 100, and it's 2 decibels higher than that. So if it would have been 3 decibels, that would have been another factor of 2, which would have been 200. So we're close to 200 times louder with the tube than without the tube. That's really dramatic when I don't have the tube in place and then put the tube in place. So that is the resonant frequency for this tube. This tube really likes 120 hertz. It's the fundamental frequency. So what I say over the next couple of minutes, make sure that you get it. And if you don't, stop me and say, explain that again. So why does it do that? Well, if you could look at the if you could see the speaker in slow motion, you'd see it going like this, pumping back and forth towards the tube. It's doing it 120 times a second. So what happens is it'll push out and it creates a compression in the air. And that compression goes all the way down the length of the tube. And when it gets here, there's a difference in impedance. I mean, you know, it looks like air inside and air outside is the same, but there's a big difference in the impedance from the perspective of the sound wave. So when it reaches here, it reflects back. In fact, almost all of it reflects back. You know, maybe 2% gets out. But the great majority reflects back. So there's this compression that comes back along the length of the tube. And when it hits the beginning of the tube again, well, it reflects. Now here's the important point. During the time that that compression went down to the end and came back, the speaker, it's done this. It's gone back and forth. And so at the moment that the compression reflects again from the front of the tube, the speaker's ready to push on it at that instant. So do you see that that compression gets amplified? And so now you got a compression that's twice as big as it was before, twice as much energy. It goes down, reaches the end of the tube, comes all the way back, and in the time that it's made that transition, the speaker's done it again. It's gone back once, comes forward. So at the instant that the wave's ready to reflect back again, the speaker pushes on it. So this happens every time. It's like being at the park and being ready to push on the person on the swing. So every time the person on the swing comes back, you give them a push. You give them more energy, and they go to a higher amplitude. It's the same thing here. That speaker is just pumping on that compression at just the right time. So if this were a little bit longer tube or a little bit shorter tube, it wouldn't work very well. And in fact, if I try to do this with a different frequency, I see your hand, Elliot. Hold on just a moment. If I try to do it with a different frequency, a little bit lower, that doesn't work very well. I'm down to 107. Back up to 120. That 120 works really well. If I go higher, that doesn't work very well because I'm not hitting it just right anymore. You see, that would be like if the person's on the swing and they're almost all the way back, but not quite, and they give a push. Or, they come up to the top of their swing and they start back down, I kind of push on the air behind them. It has to be right in sync, and that's what I've gotten the speaker to do. Elliot.
So why doesn't it get exponentially louder?
It does, well, it gets louder and louder and louder, but you got to remember, we are losing some. There's about 2% that's leaking out. And so very quickly you get to a point where the amount of energy that's leaking out is exactly the same as the amount of energy that the speaker's putting in. And it's much louder inside. You think it's loud out here. Most of the energy stays inside. So that's the fundamental frequency of this particular, are you still raising your hand?
No.
Okay, it looks like it. That's the fundamental frequency of this tube. Now let's see how well you did in the reading. What if I wanted to get another resonant frequency? This should work for other frequencies besides 120 hertz. What do you suppose another frequency would be? Sarah?
I was gonna say how you could get another, but never mind.
Okay. Give you a number. Yes, sir.
240.
240. You just multiply it by 2. Wind instruments are harmonic instruments. That means that all of the higher overtones are integer multiples of the fundamental. So if the fundamental is 120, we better get a resonant frequency at 240 and 360 and 480. Any integer that you can multiply that 120 by this tube should really like it. So let's give that a try. So we're going to go back to 120. There's the 120. And then as I dial up, it doesn't really like these frequencies. Around, well, if you're in front, you can see the window. You can see where I'm going. Oh, really likes 240. All right, so that's the second harmonic. And then not so much. And there we are at 360. So every time I hit an increment of 120 hertz, I hit this resonant frequency that this particular tube really, really likes. Okay, questions about that? Yes, ma'am.
So, the speaker's doing 120 per second.
Mm-hmm. And the
does-
wave inside is reflecting back and forth.
120.
120 times per
Okay.
second.
Sorry.
Mhm.
Wait,
Sure.
we're not going to 240.
Any integer multiple of 120 is going to work just fine.
360 is not.
Yes, it is. 3 times 12 is 36. Okay, so I think we're done with that. And that's just to show you the physics of how a wind instrument works. This is like a pipe organ, isn't it? I don't know if you've ever seen one of those big pipe organs in a church before, but all of the pipes are different lengths. And the ones that are designed for the lowest frequency are really long. And when you press on the key that plays that particular pipe, it drives air into that pipe at its resonant frequency. Yes, sir.
So can we theoretically calculate like the level of resonance given the length of whatever object?
Oh, yeah.
Like physical
Sure.
attributes.
Okay. Yeah, it's basically based,
Under hertz.
roughly it's based just on the length. There are some other kind of subtle things going on as well. Jackson?
Okay, so if you cut the length of that tube in half, but kept it at 120 hertz,
It would
would it
work.
make the same sound that that length of tube at 240 hertz would make?
No, it'd be 120. You're hearing 120 hertz, but if you cut it in half, actually, no. If you cut it in half, then the resonant frequency would be the fundamental frequency would be 240.
Okay.
So, if you made this twice as long, what was your question again?
If you cut it in half, would 120 sound like 240?
No, 120 wouldn't work anymore.
Okay.
Like 240 sound like the one.
Well, 240 would sound like 240 when, it would, you know, the sound would get a lot louder, but
The
it would
shorter
So
still,
that would be
length,
fundamental.
the higher.
the high, yeah, exactly.
So
Right.
look at the fundamental frequency,
Hmm?
the 240 if you cut it in half.
If I cut this in half, the new fundamental frequency would be twice as much.
Yeah, so if you doubled it, it would be 60.
Yeah. Okay, so when you're done, come on back.